Okay, so this is my project on evolution. By the way, thank you for listening, if you are listening. So, types of finches. So the reason I have this picture on is because it said that we needed to correlate the example of each of these to a specific animal. So I did different types of animals, but just to be safe, we're going to stick with the finch because it's very basic and it's really easy to explain how these all connect to it. And these are different types of finches, and they look really pretty, honestly. So natural selection, and by the way, just so you know, every single one of my slides has a link, and all my links are on the very end too. Natural selection is the process of organisms adapting to their environment. Natural selection gives the specific species an advantage, like longer necks in giraffes or wolves with more stamina. Charles Darwin made the theory of natural selection. Natural selection could be important to finches because if a finch has a better stomach or stronger wings, then they could eat more or they could fly longer. Or if they have better eyes, they can see even better in the night. Maybe they can collect food then. Like, okay, so this also correlates to giraffes because this giraffe has a short neck, this giraffe has medium neck, and this giraffe has a long neck. So this giraffe can eat all of their food, so it gets 2 times the amount of food that it would get if it was him. This guy gets one. He gets 1 more% food than this guy. Kind of weird to explain, but he can only eat here. This guy can eat all the way over here, but this guy can eat up here and over here, which means that he can eat at the same time as all three of them. It just means that you can survive and reproduce and stuff like that. And this process of natural selection happens over hundreds of years or millions of years and stuff. Variation. So genetic variation is the diversity between different genes. It refers to the differences between populations or individuals, and a mutation is the leading cause of genetic variation, although sexual reproduction and genetic drift also contribute to it. This example would be with chickens. This chicken is, well, basically the colors of the chicken is darker, this chicken's lighter, and this chicken has less dots than those two chickens. But it also has to correlate with finches because this finch, the variation between these is this one has a bigger beak, this one has a little smaller beak, and then this guy has a sharper, and it's kind of more like flat. And here's my link and a picture of like genetics and stuff. Adaptation. So, an adaptation is a biological characteristic with inheritable traits. These traits improve reproduction and survival. Evolutionary adaptation or simple adaptation is the adjustment of an organism to their environment to improve their chances of survival. With a cat, an example of adaptation would be this cat wants to go to a hot environment, needs to lose some fur so it doesn't overheat. This cat wants to go to a colder environment, it needs to gain some fur so it doesn't freeze to death. With finches, the adaptation is the size of their beak. The reason it's needed is because this one needs to eat seeds, this one needs to mine into wood, and this one needs to eat insects from the ground. And so this seed adaptation would help them break down the stuff. And here's my link. Here's an example of the different areas where the finches came from and the adaptations that they come with. Speciation. There are different types of speciations: allopatric, paratric, semipatric, and artificial. The formation of the new distinct species in the course of evolution is speciation. Speciation occurs when a new plant or animal species is made, when species separate from their other members and develop their own characteristics. Here's an example of each. The allopatric, this one, a whole barrier is formed, and since they're isolated, they form new species. This one, small group leaves, forms their own niche, then new species. This one, they're still connected, but they're kind of far away from each other. So then maybe they form a new niche, maybe they don't, and new species. This one is very weird because they're basically just in the middle of the population, but they don't mate with the other guys. Kind of weird. And here's my link, and it has to do with finches for speciation because the reason that in the Galapagos Islands the finches had different beak sizes is because at once the Galapagos Islands were probably connected, but then because they moved, they were isolated to different areas. Kind of, it's probably allopatric. They're isolated into different areas and they created their own niches. And here's a more in-depth guide for the different speciations. I'm going to read it out to you, but National Geographic, this link is very important. It explains a lot more about these different types of speciation. And so allopatric speciation happens to species when they separate into different groups, which isolates them from one another. Paratric speciation occurs when small groups break off from one big group to form a new species. And patratric speciation, the organism spreads over a large landmass. Sympatric speciation occurs when no barriers prevent members of the other species from mating, and all members are near each other. And artificial speciation, which is the fifth, which was not explained on this, happens when humans intervene. Oh my god, I'm getting confused. What happens when humans intervene? So next is competition. So competition is very important because every single one of these examples that I have, speciation, adaptation, variation, and natural selection, would not be important in any way if there was no competition. Competition is the fighting between creatures for limited resources such as food and territory. Competition is the factor that makes mutations a make or break in an ecosystem. Studies have shown that competition in interspecific species, competition can regulate population dynamics. So basically, they eat the other species, meaning that there's not an overproduction. But there's competition in every single species. That's why I have an example of every single picture. It would relate to finches because if there's a bunch of finches, then the ones with the better eyesight or the better mutation would do better in the competition. And there's always competition. So, like, yeah, because there's only a certain amount of resources on the earth, stuff like that. So, overproduction also leads to competition. Overproduction in biology means that each generation has more offspring than they can support or be supported by the environment. If there are only so many resources and an abundance of animal that eat that resource, then overproduction has occurred. Overproduction can lead to fewer plants or animals due to that plant or animal being eaten, leading to less food the next year. Salmon overproduce. They have a lot of eggs, meaning there's less resources. Bunnies overproduce. They eat all the grass and stuff. Finches don't really overproduce, but finches lay 4 to 5 eggs a year, and so it multiplies over time. And so eventually there is going to be a bunch of finches and it's going to be overproduced. There's just not going to be enough food for all those finches. Unless, of course, a predator eats them. And so here's my links to all my information. And I'd like to thank you for listening, and goodbye.